The wealthy do not build in straight lines. Most people spend their entire financial lives accelerating, earning more, measuring progress by the month, never once questioning whether the structure itself was designed for their protection or their exhaustion. Solomon did not build generational wealth through constant motion. He built it through something far more disciplined, far more ancient. It was encoded into scripture, practiced by entire civilizations, and quietly abandoned the moment the world decided that speed was the same thing as strength. It is not. Tell me in the comments, were you ever taught this about money? Sit with that for a moment. Not as a motivational phrase, not as a comfort, as a structural observation about how capital actually moves across time, expanding each quarter, measuring yourself against last month's numbers. Then you have been operating inside a system that was never designed for your protection. It was designed for your exhaustion. The finish line moves. The race never ends. It is the natural result of a flawed architecture. There is a different structure, an older one. It does not respond to quarters. It moves in cycles of 7 years, deliberate, disciplined, and structured around one principle that most modern thinkers have never encountered. This is where we begin. Each year, his income grows by a percentage, a vacation that reflects his progress. He is, by every social measure, succeeding. But examine his balance sheet 5 years into this pattern. His income has climbed, his assets have not kept pace, his liabilities have expanded alongside his lifestyle. He is earning more and simultaneously more fragile. A single disruption, a health event, a market correction, a professional setback, and the entire structure becomes unstable. This is not a story about one man. The illusion is this, that growth must be continuous, that expansion must follow every profitable season, that to pause is to fall behind. It is an illusion because it ignores the most fundamental truth of all durable systems, that strength requires seasons of consolidation, not perpetual expansion. A tree that grows without deepening its roots does not become more powerful, it becomes more vulnerable. The ancient world understood this with a precision that modern culture has largely discarded, and no civilization encoded this understanding more deliberately than the Hebrew economic system documented in the Torah. In Ecclesiastes 3, Solomon writes with a clarity that belongs more to the language of architecture than poetry. To everything there is a season, a time for every purpose under heaven. Most people receive that passage as consolation, as permission to rest after difficulty. But read it as a structural principle, as an economic framework, and its implication becomes far more specific. Timing governs increase. Not effort alone, not intelligence alone. Solomon was not speaking philosophically without application. He was articulating the governing logic of an entire economic system, one that was given formal legal structure in the book of Deuteronomy. Economic accounts are reset. This was not superstition. A system-level intervention that protected the long-term health of an entire, and that cycle was not optional. Structure preceded prosperity. Now consider the assumption that governs almost every modern conversation about money. More effort produces more wealth. It feels correct. It is intuitively satisfying. It interrupts it. A merchant decides that 3 profitable years justify a significant expansion of inventory. He acquires more product, more staff, more space. Then the 4th year brings a contraction, not a collapse. Simply a contraction. The error was the timing. He expanded when the season called for consolidation. The disciplined builder understands that restraint in a profitable season is not the absence of confidence. It is the highest expression of it. He is operating inside a larger structure that the moment cannot disturb. Wealth is protected in restraint. This brings us to the mechanism itself. It does not require interpretation of visions or reading of signs. 5 years of intentional accumulation. 1 year of consolidation. 1 year of reset. Then the cycle begins again. That is the architecture. 7 years. 3 distinct phases. Each phase with a specific purpose that must not be violated, not because of superstition, but because violating the phase destroys the compounding that the previous phase built. Why 7? In Hebrew tradition, 7 represents completion, not perfection in the idealistic sense, completion in the structural sense, a finished unit, a bounded cycle. The Shemittah is the 7th year, the year of release, that gives meaning to the 6 years of accumulation that preceded it. 7 is not arbitrary. It is the architecture of a completed cycle. And this matters because most modern financial timelines are either too short or undefined entirely, or they speak vaguely of long-term goals without any structural boundary to hold the commitment in place. A defined beginning, a defined ending, a clear structure within which discipline can operate without ambiguity. Structure precedes prosperity. The first phase of the code runs from year 1 through year 5. This is the accumulation phase, and it must be understood precisely because it is not simply about saving money. It is about building in a specific manner. He builds skills that compound over time. He does not expand his cost of living each time his income grows. Consider the disciplined family. In the first year of their cycle, they identify one appreciating asset to position themselves in. Not speculatively, not emotionally. Based on patient evaluation, they acquire it. In the second year, they maintain their ratios. The third year arrives with the temptation income has grown. The disciplined family does not respond to social pressure. They respond to the cycle. The structure held because the structure was respected. This is what accumulation without expansion pressure looks like. It is not exciting. It is not visible. It does not generate applause. But stability rarely does. Covenant thinking requires restraint. 14 years. 2. Complete cycles. Walk through that carefully. In the first cycle, years 1 through 7, a household earns, saves, acquires, and refuses to expend their lifestyle in proportion to their income. By year 6, they are consolidating. In year 7, they release, reduce liabilities, reassess direction, allow the structure to breathe. They enter the second cycle with more clarity than capital. They know which assets performed. They know which habits held. They know which pressures they are capable of resisting. The second cycle begins on top of what the first cycle built. By the end of 14 years, the compounding is not primarily financial. They are not the same thinkers they were at year 1. Others are expanding. The disciplined builder watches this and feels not envy, exactly, but a subtle question. Am I falling behind? And it is the most important one in the entire framework. It requires the ability to evaluate position not against others' timelines, but against your own cycle. It requires knowing precisely which year of the code you are in and trusting that the structure is operating correctly even when it is invisible. And that silence, that disciplined refusal to announce, to expand prematurely, to perform financial confidence for social approval, that silence is not passivity. It is the highest form of covenant discipline. The viewer who reaches this point without resistance is beginning to separate from the reactive financial identity that the modern world assigns by default. There is a deeper layer to this code, and its function is not what most people would expect. The 7th year is the most misunderstood year in the entire structure. Most people, if they encountered the concept of a reset year, would interpret it as a year of loss, a year of pause, a year in which nothing is built and therefore nothing is gained. They would look at it from inside the modern framework. That resistance is precisely why most people never experience the compounding that covenant timing produces. Economic obligations were restructured. The borrower who was released from debt has regained capacity. The creditor who released the debt has demonstrated a covenant character that strengthens his standing in the community. The entire economic system enters its next cycle, not exhausted and overextended, but restored and clarified. The Shemittah was not charity. It was engineering. Long-term system engineering built into law so that no single generation's impatience could compromise the structural health of what was being built across centuries. Solomon understood this. His wealth was not the product of constant motion. It was the product of a structure that knew when to move and when to be still. As Solomon understood, timing precedes increase. The financial architecture is reviewed not for opportunities to expand, but for vulnerabilities that accumulated during the accumulation phase. Because every 5-year accumulation phase, no matter how disciplined, introduces some degree of structural complexity. Assets acquired, positions held. The 7th year asks a simple question of each one. Does this belong in the next cycle? Some things do. And the clarity to distinguish between them can only come during a year of deliberate stillness. The second level is cognitive. When you are inside a phase of active building, your attention is necessarily focused on execution. You are acquiring, saving, positioning. The architecture of your attention is oriented toward forward motion. This is appropriate during accumulation, but it produces a specific kind of blindness, the inability to see the whole structure clearly because you are too close to the construction. The 7th year provides the distance that evaluation requires. Are among the most valuable outputs of the entire cycle. More valuable, in many cases, than any single asset acquired during the 5 accumulation years. Not stress in the dramatic sense, but the accumulated pressure of sustained decision-making, sustained restraint, sustained discipline across 5 years of quiet execution. And if it is not released intentionally, it begins to compromise the quality of the decisions made in the next cycle. The reset year is decompression. It is the psychological equivalent of the resting field, a period in which the mind that has been building is allowed to return to its natural clarity before it is asked to build again. The reset year fuels the next 5, not in the sense of poverty or suffering, in the sense that the world around the covenant builder will not stop moving during his reset year. His peers will continue expanding, and the disciplined builder will be still. He will do what the structure requires, which is nothing that the external world will recognize as success. This is where the ego becomes the primary threat to the entire framework. The ego reads stillness as failure and silence as irrelevance. And so the man who has successfully maintained discipline through 5 accumulation years and 1 covenant thinking requires restraint. Structurally, as a permanent feature of the identity that covenant wealth demands. Extend the timeline. Now, each one beginning on the foundation that the previous one built. Each reset year generating the clarity that makes the next accumulation phase more precise and more protected than the one before. The compounding that occurs across 21 years is not primarily financial. The financial compounding is real and significant, but it is the output, not the mechanism. The mechanism is the gradual refinement of a decision-making architecture that becomes, over 3 complete cycles, almost immune to the short-term volatility that dismantles most financial structures. Not because he is emotionally indifferent to them, that is the output of 21 years lived inside this framework. And the man who has lived 3 complete cycles looks nothing like the man who began the first one, in the way he processes information, evaluates opportunity, and responds to pressure. There is a practical dimension to this that deserves clarity. The daily expression of the 7-year timing code is not complex. It does not require sophisticated tools or esoteric knowledge. It requires one simple and consistent practice, knowing which year of the cycle you are currently in. If you are in an accumulation year, your questions are, am I saving at the ratio this cycle requires? Am I acquiring in the category this cycle designated? If you are in a consolidation year, your questions are, where is my exposure? What risks were acceptable during accumulation but are unnecessary now? What requires release? What direction has this cycle clarified? What does the next cycle need to begin from a position of restored clarity? These are not complicated questions. What should I buy? What should I invest in? They are simply operating at the wrong timescale. They are calendar questions being asked of a cycle structure. And a cycle structure cannot be navigated by a calendar mindset. Begin each week with one simple reflection. Which year of the cycle am I in? Identity forms through repetition. Not through single decisions, but through the accumulated weight of 1,000 aligned ones. A calm warning. When the assets are performing, when the cycle is progressing as intended, and the temptation will arrive to accelerate. To take the consolidation year and treat it as a 6th accumulation year. To skip the reset. To capture more while capturing us available. That temptation is the most sophisticated threat to the entire framework, because it does not arrive in the language of impulse. It arrives in the language of discipline. It is the cycle being broken at the moment it is most powerful. Breaking rhythm invites instability, not immediately, but structurally in the same way that a rested field outperforms an exhausted one across a decade. The builder who completes his reset year will outperform the builder who skipped it by the time the next cycle reaches its midpoint. The wise prepare for seasons before they arrive. Return to Ecclesiastes 3. To everything, there is a season. He was encoding into language what the covenant economic system encoded into law, that prosperity is not the product of constant motion, but of motion aligned to season. Accumulation in its season. Consolidation in its season. Release in its season. 7 years. Repeated across a lifetime with the discipline of a man who has separated his identity from the noise of monthly performance and anchored it to the structure of covenant timing. This is not a system for people who want to be wealthy quickly. There is no such system. Anything that promises speed promises fragility in disguise. This is a system for people who want to think differently about time, about money, about what it means to build something that survives not just one season, but many. The question is no longer how much you are earning. The question is which year of the cycle you are in and whether your behavior matches what that year requires. Structure protects prosperity. Generational wealth moves quietly. The season determines the strategy. And the wise do not wait for the season to arrive before they have prepared for it. 1 year consolidation. 1 year reset. Which year are you in?